Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for sometimes serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive discussions, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman, Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at Counseling and Wellness Services. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am April Fellers, a nurse and sexual health educator at the Student Health Center. I also use she, her pronouns. We are two white, cisgender, heterosexual, female-identifying clinicians, one with a medical background and the other with mental health experience, who seek to create a space that is inclusive of all identities, backgrounds, and perspectives.
Today on the podcast, we are welcoming Dr. Marybec Griffin. Dr. Griffin received her PhD in social and behavioral sciences from New York University, has previously completed an MPH at NYU, and holds an MA in international affairs from the New School. In addition, she is trained as a doula and a certified sexologist. Her research focuses on healthcare access among LGBTQ+ youth adults, sexual health education, and the impact of media, music and film on identity and behavior. She is the co-creator of Dr. Period Hackers, a menstrual health research and education collective. Dr. Griffin is working on a book examining femininity in slasher films, which sounds fascinating. Mm-hmm. She is an adjunct professor at NYU and an assistant professor at Rutgers University. She has worked at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in areas of HIV/AIDS policy and program design, as well as helping to evaluate the quality of sexual health services and contraceptive coverage in New York City. In her free time, she enjoys baking, card making, and studying French.
That is all true.
Is there anything else that you that we left out, or if you want to share your pronouns, that would also be helpful?
Yeah, my pronouns are she, her, and elle, since I speak French, and ella, if we're talking in Spanish. So yeah.
Excellent.
That's great. I'm listening to your bio. I'm like, how have you done all of these things? You don't look old enough to have done all of these things, and you just have such a wide range of experiences and so many different areas.
Thank you. Well, I'm 42, so I think I'm older than I look. Also, I drink a lot of water, and I hydrate and moisturize regularly. And I stay out of the sun as much as I possibly can because I have the absence of melanin.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Feeling you.
Well, we're so excited to have you here today. And this is going to be kind of a hybrid episode because we want to hear all about your research that is very applicable to our topic. But we also are curious if you want to share your personal experiences with
Absolutely.
us and think that could be valuable to this conversation as well.
Yeah, I'm an oversharer, so I'll answer any question.
Well, we also are offering to be oversharers today, or sharers. You know, we don't want this to just be you put on the spot. So we'll try to create an equitable space. And so while we have some questions prepared, you can always flip questions around on us. Maybe not the research ones. We won't know those answers. But, any personal questions, we're happy to answer. If there's something that we have left out of the conversation that you want to bring in, either related to your research or personal topics, we are happy to gauge those as well.
Excellent.
Yeah. Can you share something that you like about being part of the NYU community?
I have wanted to go to NYU since I was maybe 8, and I would watch The Cosby Show, and Theo Huxtable went to NYU, and the family lived in Brooklyn. They always made such a big deal that he would come home and eat food there. And I was like, well, this looks like a family that resembles mine. I mean, not racially, but okay, mother, father, working kids, a bunch of kids. I'm one of 4. And so I was like, well, if NYU is good enough for Theo Huxtable, it's good enough for me. So that was really it. It had always been my dream to move to New York City. I went to high school in Alabama, so that's where I always say that I'm from. And I had always wanted to be in the city, and NYU seemed to be at the very, very heart of it. And I just, yeah. So it just a thing I picked up from TV, and I was like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. No other women in my family have ever been to college. I'm the first female college graduate, and my dad has a bachelor's degree in chemistry and physics. So not somebody who could kind of help me navigate what it was like to go into a more social science So I took a lot of my cues from just other people around, which I think is something that happens with a lot of first-gen or first-gen-ish college students. So yeah, it's really the Cosby Show. That's why I'm at NYU.
Well, then the city or NYU seemed to hook you since you kept coming back.
Yeah, it's been like my absolute love. And it kept coming up in other ways. Like when I was a kid, I would watch the I Love Lucy show, and obviously like Lucy and Ricky Ricardo living here in the city and going to Macy's and things like that. And again, I was like, well, I want to be like Lucille Ball. She seems like she's got everything kind of going for her. So just the city, I mean, is so much a character in media and things like that. Yeah. And it was one of those things I was like, this seems like something I want to try. I think it will be a challenge for somebody who is an introvert and from just like smaller towns and suburbs and things like that. And I love it. I moved in 2005 and I've been here ever since.
Yeah, I'm really connecting to your story because when I was 5, my mom has a story that I told everybody that I was going to move to New York. And I have no idea why. I was from a small town in Kansas.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
And I moved here in 2004. So,
there we go.
Similar.
We're similar.
Yeah.
I'm following you around, I think.
Yeah. Can you share with us how you came to be interested in your research areas and what are some of the benefits of the work that you do and the challenges that you experience?
So when I was a kid, so I was born in 1980, as I already disclosed, I'm 42. What was dominating the news cycle at the time was HIV/AIDS, and also then things like Jeffrey Dahmer. So my parents never ever restricted access to the news, but would not let us watch things like The Simpsons or South Park or anything like that. MTV was absolutely forbidden. So of course every time they snuck out, I would put on MTV, and I'm like, people seem to be just like being sexy, and I'm like, yes. But what I really got interested in was people were dying because of misinformation and stigma and shame around being in love with people who society said that they shouldn't be, or having sexual relationships with people who society was like, that's not okay. And I was like, well, that doesn't seem fair or right. Like I was raised kind of broadly Christian. I was like, well, doesn't the Bible say to like love everybody? And so it didn't make sense, and it didn't make sense with the messages that my parents were giving me. And I was just like, well, this doesn't seem right. And of course, as like an 8-year-old watching this unfold in like 1988, 1989, you don't have the words for identities or intersectionality and things like that. But I was like, well, nobody should ever be afraid of being able to be alive or getting health care just because there's something about them that other people don't like and because they don't have information. And so that was one of the things that really was like, okay, this doesn't seem right. I want to do something in the world to change that, or to at least open up conversations around who we are and our identities. And then on the other hand, in a very personal way, my mom was not somebody that my sister and I could talk to about sex. And my brothers, it was very different because they had the sex talk with my dad. But my sister and I being the oldest two in the family, me being the oldest of all of them, we would ask questions and she would just be like, no, that's not something that like good girls do. We're like, oh, like could we get on birth control, things like that. And we're like 14, 15. And if your 14 or 15-year-old is asking you for that, there is probably a reason. Either they're sexually active, or they experience really bad cramping, or they just want to regulate their menstrual cycle or something. But she would always kind of shut us down, which led to just a lot of discomfort and a lot of scary things that sort of happened as a result. And then when we finally got on birth control, she was like, well, I had a really bad experience. So like, you're going to have really high blood pressure and you need to watch out because you'll have a heart attack. And I was like, I don't think that's the way it works. It's like these people that we should be able to talk to, we couldn't. And sex was like stigmatized and shamed. So again, I got a lot of messages from the TV and radio about sexuality, like MTV. And it was like, okay, well, everyone seems to be out there being like a sexual being. I was like, okay, so this seems more like how I want my life to be. And then in 1991, that song Let's Talk About Sex by Salt-N-Pepa came out, and that is absolutely foundational to my existence. Because I was like, well, here are 3 women, the two that rap, and then Spinderella, who does the beats for it, actually talking about sex and talking about protecting themselves and enjoying sex. And I was like, yes. So fortunately, my ears were quicker than my mom's. So when the song would come on, I would turn it down just low enough where she wouldn't hear the song, because if she heard it, she'd make me turn it off. But I could still hear it and listen to those messages. So that's where I was like, oh, it's okay to be talking about this, because I was getting information from my friends who were equally as clueless, and they would tell me things like, well, if you have sex with boy A and then you have sex with boy B, you can't get pregnant because you have to have sex with the same person 2 times in a row. And it's like,
wow.
Yeah, it's like, that seems incorrect, but I have no information. So just for any listener out there who doesn't know, you don't have to have sex with the same person twice to get pregnant. Any person, one encounter alone can get you pregnant. But yeah, so it was things like that. And I was like, this shouldn't be a way other people have to grow up. There shouldn't be the stigma and the shame around something that's an innate part of the human experience if you're interested in sex. And if you're not, then it's still an innate part of who you are and your identities. So yeah. So a lot of just not wanting people to have the same experiences that I did. And this idea that research is very often me-search. So you're just trying to understand your own experiences in the world. Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because some of the topics you're talking about, there's many ways that you could have gone about it. You know, I'm a nurse and, you know, you could have gone in the healthcare route. You could have gone to teaching high school. You could go the counseling route. Yeah. And so I'm curious what it was about doing research and becoming a professor and some like kind of how that became your goal.
Well, I always knew that med school is not for me because I am terrified of dead things, even though I think about death literally every day. But like blood and stuff like that I'm very kind of squeamish about. And I was like, I don't think that I could do any kind of clinical thing.
Well, although it's dead people don't have blood, so
I know, but it's like you have to take the blood. You have to practice on the dead people to get to the point to take the blood. But also, I don't know that. I don't really know how a cell functions, so that's also another pretty big barrier to entry for med school for me. And so I actually started out in the realm of international affairs and political science because I was interested in women's political participation. And I was like, okay, well, why aren't femme-bodied people or people with a vulva represented in political structures? And I was like, well, it's things like access to childcare and access to birth control and things like that. So then from like a human development perspective, I took a step back and I was like, okay, well, how do we get these tools of bodily autonomy to people? And that's where I became more interested in the health side of things. And obviously like HIV, AIDS too. Like if people are sick and are dying, they obviously cannot participate in the political processes because they have things that are more fundamentally important. And I was like, health kind of is the fundamental thing that all people need to be happy, obviously to be healthy, and then to participate and advocate for the way they want the world to change and to move forward. So it became kind of one of those fundamental causes. And then I was like, yeah, but you've always been interested in sex and health and things like that. So why not just focus on that? Because again, I had no idea, because when I was growing up, everyone was like, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I was like, oh, well, those must be the only things that people can do, or like a teacher or something like that. So I thought I was going to have a career in law or be a career kind of bureaucrat at various governmental organizations. Ideally, like the UN would have been my sort of pinnacle. And it just happened really slowly over time, where I kept being like, okay, but these are the types of jobs that I want. And they wanted somebody with 10 years of experience or a PhD. And I was just like, well, I'm at 6 years of experience. If I get a PhD and keep working, I could have both. And then they can't tell me no. And I'm just somebody who is unendingly curious. And I was very, very, very fortunate that my father instilled this belief in us that we could do whatever we wanted, and that curiosity and education were the single highest pursuits that a human could have. Just being curious and just learning all that you could. And so when I told my family, I was like, yeah, so I applied for a PhD program and I got in. So I think I'm going to do that. Everyone looked at me and was like, yeah, obviously. How did you not know that? And I was like, oh, well, I wish
taken long enough.
Yeah, I was like, well, I wish you had told me, because I've been struggling with this decision. And I started my PhD at 34, 33. So a little bit older than a lot of people usually do. And I was like, oh, well, you could have saved me a lot of agony if all of you had just been like, yeah, we knew you were going to do this. Why didn't you do this? So yeah, I sort of fell into it. And I love teaching more than anything. I really love connecting with students and young people in the classroom and getting them passionate about the things that I'm passionate about, because one day I want to retire. I'm going to be older and more tired.
So and I want to take after.
Yeah, I want to know that there are people out there that are trained that can carry on the work. I mean, hopefully we won't have to. I would love to put myself out of business.
I say that all the time.
Yeah.
Put yourself out of a job. Yeah. That would be amazing.
So yeah. And mentoring. I really love mentoring students too. And just like helping people kind of figure out their path.
Yeah.
That's great. That is great. Well, I'm particularly interested in the work that you're doing around messaging in the media and the impact that it has on like identity and behavior.
Yeah.
I feel like April and I discuss oppressive ideologies that come from various different places all of the time in this podcast. But I really am thinking about, some of the research on female sexuality and music and, what impact that it has on people and how they behave. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of that research.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of this research with a fellow NYU grad, Adele Fournay. She has her PhD in ethnomusicology from NYU. So she knows like the music theory stuff, and then I can talk about the health messaging. So we have two different research studies. One looks at condom messages in rap music, and we only look at rap music because generally speaking, pop music doesn't really talk about sex, or at least not in the same way. And the idea also that rap music is usually written by the artists themselves, so it serves more as like an interview, like if you're going to sit down in a qualitative kind of way and like talk to us about your life experiences. So it tends to be written by the artist. So you have a very different kind of look at things. And so we found with the condom messaging that a lot of it was very mixed. Like sometimes the artists were talking about using condoms, usually to protect yourself from, I won't use the words that they use because I don't know how friendly the podcast is to foul language. Oh, okay. Like protecting yourselves from like bitches and hoes because they just want to get pregnant and take your money. And then other times being like, yeah, you should use a condom. It's a responsible thing. Like you don't want kids, things like that. So even when there are messages about using condoms, they're still sometimes very misogynistic. And then there's a ton of messaging around just not using a condom. Like Old Dirty Bastard saying that he likes it raw, or Eminem. The name of the paper is called Fuck Bitches Raw on the Kitchen Floor, which is an Eminem lyric. So looking at the messages that way, because the idea that music is the soundtrack of our lives, even if we don't like rap music, if we're in like a drugstore or the supermarket, like you can't escape it. And then we're getting these messages and this idea of like norm forming, like broad socialization theory, from J.J. Arendt, that what you hear, and especially if you're hearing these things, getting these messages from media and music and things like that, especially in the absence of your parents or religious figures or education settings, teachers, professors providing real information about this, you will seek out information wherever you can seek it out. Very much my own story when I was talking about Salt-N-Pepa. And that's how we form our norms. And so some of the newer work that we have, we're looking at female artists only because rap tends to be a very male-driven genre. There's just more male artists that are represented. So the new line of research that we have looks at messages around sexuality among female artists, looking at rap music and pop music, because pop music will sort of allude to sex in that very kind of like metaphorical way, like Jessica Simpson talking about like, oh, one day when I'm married, I can't wait for us to have sex. Or like Britney Spears, like, oops, I did it again. Or like Kesha talking about being drunk. So it's very much like, whoops, I was drunk and I became a sexual being for just a minute. But like, I'm a virgin, I promise. With the notable exception of like Alanis Morissette and Madonna and things like that. And pop tends to be driven by, or white women are allowed, that's air quotes, in pop music. Whereas Black women or women of color tend to be forced into like a hip hop, R&B, rap genre. But we found that the messages in hip hop, rap, R&B tend to be more explicit and focused around pleasure, around and like exploring sexuality and being like, no, I am a sexual being. But interestingly, with the female artists, as compared to the paper with the rap and condom use paper, female artists, regardless of genre, their music tends to be written by writing teams that include men. So even when we have a song like Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, when we have WAP, where they're talking about their wet-ass pussies, Megan Thee Stallion is credited as a writer, but Cardi B is not, and the rest of the writing team is all male. So there is still a lot of male gaze that's happening, which then can tie into things like the Jezebel stereotype, which is definitely a racist trope that Black women and women of color are just like these wanton sexual beings, as a way to kind of like excuse the rape that would happen in plantations or in slave owner settings. So even then, like it's problematic. So it's like, what comes first? What of these messages are learned? I would still say that people talking about their sexuality and promoting their own, like, I am a sexual being, I enjoy sex, here's what I like, is better than this idea of like, oh, I'm a pure little virgin until we get married. So yeah, it's really, it's interesting, and it's not as clear cut as we thought it would be. And it ties into all of these norms and stereotypes and and gender norms that are just really, really complex to pull apart. But these are messages that people are being given and have been given. The other thing I want to say is, and have been given since like the mid-60s with the Shirelles talking about like, will he still love me in the morning? So it's not like this is new. So whenever, for everyone out there that's listening, whenever you hear somebody be like, oh, music today is getting so sexualized and like, look at WAP. Like, no, it's been existing since 1965. Like the Beatles sing about really problematic things in music. And like intimate partner violence and stuff like that. So like it's been happening.
Yeah. I was thinking of the Christmas song.
Oh, yeah.
What is that song? I can't think of it. It's
Baby, It's Cold Outside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where it's like super creepy. And
Yeah. I was mad. Like when I started listening to it, I was like, oh man, this is one of my favorite ones when I was a kid. And I'm like, oh.
But I think we don't realize just how these things impact us. You were talking about how, if we don't have other people to go to, like, family or religious affiliation, and those can also be harmful too. So if you're not getting like realistic, good, factual, and comprehensive to say like it's not just, white cisgendered, it's like more friendly to people who are in different communities and who identify in different ways, who have different orientations. Like you're getting all these messages that like what you're identifying as or who you are isn't acceptable.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's also really interesting because as we were doing this, Adele and I had to read all of the lyrics, and it's really different reading what people are saying versus just hearing it. Like there's a DMX song where he talks about like fucking somebody's corpse, and we're just like, oh my God. And there's like Adele. I was like, I have to take a break for a week. Like this is really starting to affect my mental health. And so it's part of the way the brains work. When we're listening to a song or something like that, it's just a snippet of a story. It's like maybe a beginning and a middle, but you never hear about the fallout that happens afterwards. And it's written from one person's perspective. And our brains, when we're taking in information that's just audio, it takes longer to process and isn't stored in like those long-term memory parts of the brain. It's like more in the short term. But if it's something that's visual, so like if you're watching a music video or something like that, it is encoded in that like long-term memory, and there's no ambiguity about the message because you are being shown it, and you can just take in something like 60,000 bits of information. So just much more information, much more quickly when it's a visual message as opposed to an audio message. So it's just fascinating the way brains work.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think, I'd be curious about the research that you've done on the music, if you did it with music videos too, and just the images that are chosen to be portrayed, and the images of female identifying folks that are often used in music videos, and the objectification. And
it's so interesting that you mentioned that because I think the most sex positive song out there is a song from 2017 by J. Cole called Wet Dreams. And he's talking about being anxious about using a condom for the first time with a new partner and like practicing putting it on. I'm like, yes. And the female partner has agency because she's like, baby, I know you're a pro, but, please be gentle. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And like my students turned me on to the song before, because we would code the rap lyrics in order from a timeline. So starting in 1991 and then getting up to 2017. So they're like, oh, just wait. And I was like, yes. And they were telling me about the music video. I was like, this is going to be incredible. We're going to see images. And the music video is puppies. Like really little puppies, like kind of rolling around. So like the image and the lyrics will often be incongruous. And I was like, oh, this would have been such a great opportunity. But it's a wonderful song. I tweeted at both Eminem and J. Cole when the paper came out. They both ignored me. I'm like, oh, guys, you're supposed to make me famous. But they didn't.
Have you heard of the artist Rachel Lark?
No.
I really love some of her work because I think that there's some good sex education in there. And, she's more of a, folky kind of
I love folk
but she's
music.
like also funny because she talks about like having, a cyst and having to go to the emergency room.
Amazing.
But then having like, too large of a penis having caused an appendicitis.
I'm going to very quickly make a note.
So I think that like you don't often like when I found her, I was like, wow, this is like engaging. I really remember the lyrics, and it's so refreshing to have someone be honest with, sexuality and sex. And she has like a song about periods. Like,
Is she the one that has the song about how they sent Sally Ride to space with 72 tampons?
No, that's Michelle something, and I cannot remember her last name because I use her lyric all the time. So I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, where the space and rocket industry is. So they talk about sending Sally Ride up into space with 100 tampons.
100 tampons, yeah.
And they're like, and the lyric goes, and then they wondered, will that be enough? And I was like, who would use 100 tampons in an average menstrual cycle?
Yeah, this for listeners, Sally Ride was in space for 7 days. Yeah. And we don't even know if she was on her period, but they just tried to prepare, but it was men trying to prepare.
And as the song points out, they're literally rocket scientists, and they couldn't, I don't know, Google menstruation or
talk to someone with a vagina.
Anyone who might menstruate. Yeah. So it's always like, that song cracks me up.
Now I'm going to have to find the person.
Yeah. Also, just for the listeners out there, if you are using 100 tampons in your, like, a period, that is excessive bleeding, and you should absolutely talk to somebody, because we don't talk about what heavy menstrual flow is. And so many people are just like, well, it's natural for me to have to change my tampon or my pad every hour or every 2 hours. That is outside the realm of normal. So you should absolutely talk to your physician about that.
This also, we're kind of going down a menstruation rabbit hole, but did you all see recently that they used to test the absorbency of tampons with water, and just very recently released the very first research paper about testing it with actual blood?
Can I brag really quickly?
Yeah.
The senior author on that, Bethany Samuelson-Banow, is the other half of Dr. Period Hackers. So she's like a close personal friend. So we've been tweeting all day about it. And she's like, the Vagina Museum in London reposted. I was like, you know what? I've got you. I'm going to blow this up. We're going to be famous.
Yep.
Yeah. When I was like, Bethany, I was like, you must be kidding. And she's like, no, because I do a lot of research on why they use blue liquid, which of course is because it looks clean, and like Windex and all of these things. So like we didn't start seeing the color red in menstrual adverts till like 2011, and even then it was a drawn poster. And there's a UK company in 2019 that finally started using actual blood that you could see. So yeah, anyway, it's a fascinating study. Everyone should read it, and you should follow at Dr. Period Hackers on we're on Twitter, and we're trying to move to Instagram as well. Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about menstruation, there's so many like negative norms and messages around menstruating that I think impact both people who menstruate and people who don't, right? Like whether or not to have sex on while you're menstruating, whether that's like gross or whatever. I think like those negative messages are out there, but also just to say that like, there are a lot of things that are not correct and correct.
So many things that are not correct.
I know that you have like some research around this area, and you have Dr. Period Hackers. So can you tell us a little bit more about your research, but also what is, the Dr. Period Hackers collective?
So Dr. Period Hackers started just almost exactly 2 years ago today. And a friend of mine from high school, Stephen Anfield, knows somehow or followed or saw something that Bethany posted about period poverty. And he was like, Marybec, hey, we haven't talked for a minute. We're like high school friends. He's like, you should connect with this person. So Stephen knows me, doesn't really know Bethany. Bethany and I don't know each other. And we just like have a Zoom meeting. And she's like, I'm really interested in periods. And I was like, me too. She's like, and period poverty? I was like, yep. And myths and stereotypes. She's like, uh-huh. And so she was like, how about we do something where we like tweet out information like once a week? I was like, let's call it Menstrual Monday. We'll tweet on Mondays. We now have also a Fun Fact Friday. And that was it. It was just two people who connected through the magic of being strangers on the internet through one person who sort of knew us both. And that's that. And so we have a team of research interns from Rutgers, from NYU, from the Oregon Health and Science University. I'm trying to make sure I got her university name right, where Bethany is out on the West Coast, that work with us. So a bunch of young people that help us come up with the content, help us think about these things. We have a survey that's out and active now. I'm happy to share the link with anyone who wants to take it. It's open to anyone who has ever menstruated, who's between the ages of 18 and 45. And we'll then have a bunch of research coming out from that. So it's both like education and kind of pop culture stuff, and we do talks on that, research, and then we're hoping in the future to start a nonprofit around it so we can raise our own money to do research outside of the universities and outside of getting like NIH funding, and the NIH does not care about periods. Come at me, NIH. Prove me wrong. Give me money. And then being able to collect money to make donations and have it like period pantries and things like that, and just have connected with like a lot of people around the world. In the U.S. too, that are just really passionate about this, because it's not something we're really talking about that much. which has then led to, I'm on the board of the Journal of Women's Health. So we're doing a special collection around that should come out probably beginning of next year, just around menstrual research and things like that. And so we look at a lot of different things. So Bethany is an MD, so she's a physician. So she looks at it from like clotting perspectives, and she does a lot of work with people in the bleeding disorders community. So people who have von Willebrand disease or hemophilia, because we don't often talk about their menstrual experiences. We talk a lot about trans research and menstruation because there's not a lot of information about the effects of testosterone on menstruation for people who are non-binary or who are trans-identified, and that the experience of menstruation can be really dysphoric for a lot of people. So how to make menstruation gender affirming, or as gender affirming as it can be. And then I am particularly interested in the words we use around menstruation and how we talk about it and how we see it represented in the media, especially kind of in the horror genre. Because if anyone has ever seen the film Carrie, like the beginning of the film opens with her getting her so her mother doesn't talk to her about menstruation, kind of very much my own experience. And she gets her first period in the shower in gym class and has no idea what's happening to her and is like freaked out, obviously, because all of a sudden like blood is coming out of your body. And that also then happens to be the onset of her like telekinetic powers. So we see menstruation a lot in horror genres with this like onset of like uncontrollable nature, and this idea that like menstrual blood makes people who can menstruate, so people with vulvas, like out of control, and this idea of like hysteria and this like otherness, so like a lot about the abject. So if you're interested in that, especially like kind of feminine stuff in horror films, there's a really great book by Barbara Creed. It's called The Monstrous Feminine, where Barbara Creed talks a lot about things like this and like the abject, and this idea that menstrual blood is both a sign of nurturing because it's the thing that signifies to the world that we are then people with vulvas, because I'm a person with a vulva, that we are reproductively capable, but also is something that is abject that makes people like, ooh, gross, and want to stay away from us. So it's this like duality that femme-bodied people with vulvas have to inhabit, and how impossibly narrow the foothold of that line of what is okay is.
Yeah. Can I rewind and ask you to define what period poverty is?
Yeah. So period poverty is just people's inability to afford menstrual products or anything to help with menstruation. So it can be like not being able to afford pads or tampons or things like that. It can also just be financial hardship around having to prioritize money for those services or those products over other things. And it plays out really differently in Western wealthy countries like the United States versus countries in Africa or Latin America and places like that, where people either don't have access to menstrual products at all. So they're using like old rags and things like that might not be cleaned properly, which can lead to infection, and missed days of school if you don't have any kind of collection method available to you. So it plays out really differently, but what we do see is that it usually impacts the educational opportunities and economic opportunities down the line of people who are femme-bodied or who have a vulva who can menstruate. And then we're talking about in a Western context, because menstrual products are taxed in, oh goodness, it's changing every day, but it's upward, I think it's like 35, 37 states in the U.S. And then given the fact that people with vulvas make less money overall, it becomes a bigger proportion of our paycheck. So there is a move then to eliminate the period tax as a way to help eliminate some of the financial burden of menstruation. Since it's a biological imperative, it's something that bodies just do. For any listeners out there that don't know, because I see this a lot on Twitter, there's this kind of myth that they're like, oh, well, if women can hold their pee, why can't they hold their menstruation? And you're just like, oh gosh.
Wow, that's really...
Also, it's two different holes if you didn't know.
And this was from
FYI.
And this was a tweet from a politician. So this is somebody who is in power, who is making laws about bodies that menstruate. Two different holes, two different functions. You cannot stop the bleeding. The blood just comes when the blood comes.
When you do not want it to come. When
you're wearing white shorts.
Yeah.
When you're walking down the street, minding your own business, and it's just a gush.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh, I stood up. There it is again. So it's not something that menstruators can control. Believe me, if we could hold it and just do it in the toilet, we absolutely would.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's things like that. And I'm a big proponent of what I would love to get started is Free Bleed February, where everyone who menstruates just free bleeds, meaning they don't use a pad, tampon, period, underwear, menstrual cup. And we're just like, here's my blood, deal with it, because I guarantee you we do that for a week, maybe the entire month of February, and all of a sudden we would see laws change because people are like, oh, but they're going to menstruate on the subway. Yes, we are. And there's going to be a stain. Oh, but I don't want to. Yeah, that is exactly right. Give us products for free.
Can we do that for like everything we want to advocate for?
Yeah, 100%.
Not just period?
No, I mean, I'm a low-key anarchist, so let's do it.
I like the Free Bleed February. We'll have to think of the alliterative titles for all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm super shocked at what you just revealed as one of the things that people have actually said. I'm curious, like, are there other myths that you think are important to bust here, or if that's helpful? Because I feel like, I mean, I'm shocked, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Oh, there was a recent study that came out that I think it's like from 2021 that said that 70% of high school seniors say they know more about frog biology than the human female anatomy. And I was like instantly bummed out by that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important to know that menstrual blood it's safe, it's sanitary. You absolutely can have sex while you are menstruating. There are actually a lot of health benefits to it. One, you don't need lube because it's naturally lubricating. It can actually help reduce headaches and menstrual cramps. It can also shorten your menstrual cycle. So I'm somebody who has absolutely done that and gotten my menstrual cycle down to like a day and a half of active bleeding. Wow. So yeah, that maybe is an overshare. I also only typically bleed like 3 days.
Same. I have like an inappropriate share. Yeah. There was like someone told me like years ago, there's like this really awful thing to like say or do. I don't know, do. It's a saying. It's like, if you can walk through mud, you can fuck through blood.
Amazing. Oh my God. I'm absolutely going to remember that.
That's a great one.
So that's a question that I will sometimes ask. How do you feel about walking through mud?
Just to gauge.
Just to put in the back of my head.
What's out there? What's happening? Let me think of some other. So as a doula and a sexologist, so I've thought about menstruation and periods and sex my entire life, but something I didn't know until about 2 years ago. So there are 2 phases of the menstrual cycle that I knew. There's the follicular phase, which is everything leading up to to ovulation, so the release of the egg. So that is the part of the menstrual cycle that is unstable, meaning that it can take a different amount of time every month, so your body will wait to release the egg to ovulate until it is optimal for you to become pregnant, because that is your body's imperative. That is what, so like to quote Jurassic Park, life wants to find a way. Life will find a way. So it's waiting for those optimal conditions. So when you've drank enough water, when you've slept enough, when you've taken in the right nutrients and things like that to release that egg. So when your period is late, it's not actually your period that's late. It's your ovulation that has occurred late. Mm-hmm. You are only pregnant for 24 hours out of your entire menstrual cycle. That is from when ovulation happens, and then the egg dies within 24 hours. So we spend billions of dollars on birth control to regulate the fertility of people with vulvas, and they're only fertile for 24 hours, 12 to 13 times a year. But we don't spend a lot of money trying to come up with birth control for people with a penis when they are literally fertile 365 days a year. So misogyny in science, it's the best. Sexism in science. So that second half of your menstrual cycle, the luteal phase, is when your body is then preparing to shed the uterine lining. And that's the time when you want to like stay inside. You want to like Netflix, but maybe not chill, or at least not with another human. And that part is always the same amount of time every day. For most people, it's about 14 days. So when your cycle is longer, it's that first half, that follicular phase. So knowing when you ovulate is a really important thing because it can help you prevent pregnancy and things like that. And if you really know your body and you're doing basal body temperature and you're tracking all of your symptoms, you can prevent pregnancy that way if you don't want to use any kind of birth control method. I think, in the reproductive justice movement, knowing all of the different options for birth control is really important. Some people don't want to use hormones. That is a perfectly valid choice. If it's not right for you, like if whatever it is, if it's not right for you, then it's not the method that's going to work for you.
Right. We did a birth control episode. And one of the things we said in there was like, choose the method that you will actually use. And that's different for everybody.
Yeah.
I do want to say that sperm can live in the vagina for up to 5 days. So,
Yeah.
Even if you know when you're going to ovulate, keep that in mind.
Yeah. You don't want any sperm in your body for like 3 to 5 days before. I would say maybe 5, even 7 days before. Just because you don't know. And again, because your body is waiting for those optimal conditions, that's why you have to kind of track it. So, and while we're on it, since the United States is particularly hostile to people with vulvas, tracking your period is really, really important because there is only normal to you. So when you go to the doctor, if you are experiencing odd signs and symptoms for you, one of the best things you can do is take in your period tracking device. If you use the tracker on iPhones, it is safe because of the Apple data protection policy. I really like Clue because it's not pink and it's also based in Germany. So they are they're under European data protection laws, so they can never get your information. But any company that's based in the U.S., depending on how legislation goes, it could be that they will turn that information over to the government. So track your period and just kind of think about what tracker you're using, and don't delete your data. Download it first and then delete your app. Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. So many people I read, they're like, I deleted my app. And I was like, no, that's all of your menstrual data. If there's something going wrong, you won't know what normal is for you because you've deleted all of the data.
Well, that's why I think I hadn't switched or done anything different. I was like, ooh, that's all of my and I'm on the older end of the spectrum of period, and so it's like I'm really needing to keep track of it for it's very weird when you get to be in your 40s at times, and so it's like, oh wow, I don't want to lose all of that data. So I think that's really helpful to sort of think about.
Yeah. As somebody this might be an overshare, but as somebody who's on that end of things, I've been thinking now about like, I spent my entire life thinking, oh, my stupid period. Whoa. And I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't going to happen forever. And I'm like, how do I document the experience? So like thinking about like pictures that I could take and like just making sure like when I am menstruating to like fully embody that experience, because it's not going to happen. It won't happen forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know period art is a thing.
Yeah. I'm sort of like tiptoeing into that. I'm like, let me just take some pictures of my menstruation for a minute. Yeah.
I will say, as somebody who is now pregnant, that I was using the Fitbit app to track my period. There's no option to tell your period tracker. I mean, maybe others are, but there's no way to tell this period tracker that I'm pregnant. Yeah. So it's like thinking, your period's late. Like I literally just had to turn the data collection off because there was no way to be like, no, that period is not coming. Yeah. Nope, the next one's not coming either.
So for a little plug for Clue, and I think also the Apple app, you can tell it that you're pregnant. So
because I didn't want it to mess up my data, right? I didn't want it to like screw up 5 years of data that I had collected.
Exactly.
So,
Is there anything else that you want to share with us about your research that we haven't covered yet?
Providing a little bit of a preview for the slasher book. So I'm working with a researcher, Eleanor Reynolds. She is based in Australia, and so she looks at women in science and has a particular fascination around slasher films and the idea of like femininity and the idea of the final girl is like the girl who survives and the one who isn't very prototypically feminine. She tends to be a virgin, tends to be really bookish and smart and things like that. So this idea that the less feminine you are, you get to survive. Whereas like the super femme people in slasher films or people that have expressed their femininity don't get to survive. So we're looking at things like that and how those archetypes play on this idea of like nurturing. And it's weird that my life has taken a turn for the blood. As I said at the beginning of this, I was like, I couldn't be a physician because I'm scared of blood. But now I think about it all the time. Blood. I know, but only like in a very distant kind of way, not in the like.
Are you gonna do some blood art? Like I'm
yeah, like I mean, I'm
maybe like, you could go back to medical school.
Maybe. I'm now student loan debt free, so I'm never going back to school again. I like kind of tiptoeing into menstrual art, but I think it's really the dead bodies that freak me out, like mummies.
That's funny.
So we are going to shift now to a few personal questions.
Yeah, I took us way down a tangent.
No.
A tangent where we willingly and consensually went.
Yes,
excellent.
Yes. So the first question I want to know is, who was your first crush? Maybe it was a literary character, a real person, TV character.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the Cosbys. Maybe it was Theo.
I think there were maybe 2, maybe 3. So I really love the film Labyrinth. It's a Jim Henson production, and it's got David Bowie. So obviously David Bowie is playing a very androgynous Goblin King. It also has Jennifer Connelly in it. So like I had a crush on both of them. So I don't know if it was like a couple thing, or I think that was kind of also the beginning of the sort of nascent, like, you might not be straight. And then also about that same time, Freddie Mercury is like my forever crush, but specifically him in the video for I Want to Break Free, where he's in a leather miniskirt, fishnets, and a pink shirt with like fake breasts and a wig. So he's like presenting like a woman, but he has his mustache. And I was like, maybe you're really not straight. Those are like the two kind of earliest crushes, like, well, three, I guess, that I can remember. Where I was just like, yeah, okay.
That's really fun. So can you tell us a little bit more about your journey of learning about personal boundaries and really how you developed communication skills?
Yeah, so I think it was a lot of kind of trial and error, especially like being a kid and having parents that wouldn't talk to me about sex and like just trying to have these conversations where I was like, well, I'm always that weird girl in the room in the corner usually who just wants to talk about sex. I'm like, I'm the weird girl in the corner talking about sex. And I was like, nobody wants to have these conversations. And it was just one of those things that I kept just bringing up because it was important to me as like also somebody who's really shy to get comfortable talking about these topics and kind of push myself out of my shell a little bit. And then with sexual partners, just thinking like about all of the experience I've had where I left feeling unsatisfied, never unsafe, fortunately, but just kind of like very unsatisfied. And like, I didn't feel like I had really fully expressed my desires. And it's just one of those things is like, well, you know, if you're going to talk about sex and in like a very kind of academic way, you should be able to have these conversations about wanting to use a condom and, what birth control people are on and how regularly they've been tested. And it's not a conversation that needs to be embarrassing or anything like that. And they're skills that we've all practiced through the pandemic, this idea of like, how many people have you been in contact with? Were you wearing a mask? Are you vaccinated? Those exact conversational skills that we've developed can be applied to when was the last time you were tested? Do you use condoms? How many partners have you had recently? Things like that. So yeah, it's just one of those things where I just like one day I was like, if you don't keep asking, you're going to keep having disappointing sexual experiences. So maybe we speak up. And I can't remember like a concrete moment where that happened. I mean, I do remember concrete moments where I definitely had agency. Somebody was like, oh yeah, like, you know, we were in the process of like hooking up and partially like undressed. And he was like, I don't use condoms. And I was like, oh, okay, well I do. And he's like, well, I don't. And I was like, okay. And I like got dressed. Yeah. Like I got dressed and I like walked out. And I was like, okay, like, so it's a really clear example of a boundary where it's like, you know, maybe a younger version of me would have been like, well, maybe it'll be okay. And then be really freaked out until my period came. And but like an older version of me was just like, no, I'm good. Like, this is probably going to be disappointing anyway because you're not listening to me. So there's no communication.
That's a good first sign.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was like, I'm just going to leave. Like, this isn't going to be fun for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Also, fun fact about contact tracing that was done during COVID was modeled off of, the contact tracing is common for a lot of infectious diseases, but a lot of like the partner notification and whatnot is very common in STI notifications. Yeah. And so your comment about the alignment of those conversations is really true.
Yeah.
Yeah. The kind of similar models.
I often tell my students, I was like, face masks are just condoms for your face.
I think I've said that too.
Yeah, I was like, this is the thing. I was like, they're just condoms for your face. Wear them. It's not a big deal.
And that's why you have some people who will like try to get out of it, negotiate, not wear it right.
Exactly.
Like people wearing it on their chin or people, you know.
Yeah,
yep,
exactly.
Like you gotta like wear it correctly in order for it to be effective.
Come on.
That's funny.
Can you share with us how you react to conflict and you know, how you engage in it as well? And like, are there things that you've learned throughout your journey?
Yeah, so I am not somebody who now I am somebody who can handle conflict and kind of navigate that. But as a younger person, I definitely could not. I am an anxious attacher. I've sort of hinted at like a difficult relationship with my mom. And my parents were married and my dad was around, but he traveled a lot for work. So he wasn't very physically present all of the time. So he gets kind of a pass just because he was not there. But with my mom, it was like we were always kind of like fighting for her attention and affection because she just wasn't. She was physically there, but just like not present for a lot of mental health reasons and things like that. And I always just was like, well, if I was good enough or if I was better somehow, she would love me more. And so I would do everything that I could to avoid conflict and just try to be that person. And I realized that was spilling over into my like late adolescent, early adulthood relationships, like I was married at the time, so my ex-husband, is being like, well, if I was a better person according to what he was looking for, like these situations wouldn't be happening. And so I would blame myself, which is, of course, never, ever, ever the right thing to do. So it's just a lot of kind of working through that and untangling that and realizing that I have a right to take up space. And I think a lot of young people really struggle with that and struggle with the idea of setting boundaries and being true to themselves. And it was just something that I realized one day. I was like, I would rather have people not like me for who I actually am than not like me for the version of me I'm pretending to be so that they love me. So through a lot of therapy and untangling that, I'm now somebody who's much more comfortable with conflict. And the thing that I've realized is that most of the time, if you just speak up and say what it is that you want, there actually isn't a lot of conflict that will come from it because most people also don't want to disrespect you. They want to be respectful of your boundaries. And most of them also want to avoid conflict so you can actually talk it out. So just that realization of being like, oh, I can just center my identity on those things that I actually am and what I actually believe was so, so powerful. But again, that's years of therapy and things like that. So, yeah.
And I think being able to emotion regulate is important when it comes to conflict because we do get activated by our past trauma
so much.
And so we might be not able to articulate our needs and our wants in the moment because like we're experiencing our past coming up in the present. And so being able to like take the time and the, you know, whatever space you need in order to be able to regulate and then come and be able to articulate what's going on for you and what your needs are is not something that we are. I mean, maybe they're learning a little bit more in elementary schools these days, but not something that I was, you know, taught or that I think a lot of folks were. And, you know, I think it's such a valuable skill. Yeah.
Well, especially for me, like untying anxious attachment as like a sign of excitement and desire, like learning to like no, like you feel this anxiety and that's actually not healthy. It's like you being afraid that somebody is going to leave you and now thinking about like moving into situations and relationships where I have stable attachment and then being like, right, but like I don't feel that same like anxiety. It's like, right, but that doesn't mean you don't like the person. It just means that they're there for you and you're not worried that they're going to disappear on you, which is really, really different. So like learning about like sitting down and thinking about like your attachment style, I think is also really important in this idea of like deficit mindset of just like not having had a lot, whether it's emotionally, financially, like economically when you were a kid, like all of this childhood stuff bubbles up into who you are as an adult and really taking time to untangle that. Not like it's always all a mother's fault or a father's fault, but like
I like to tell my clients when I'm not blaming your mother and your father, we just need to figure out how you interpreted some of their actions, right? It's not that like it's their fault. They're doing the best that they can considering where they're coming from, but we need to unpack how that impacted you.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
both can be true.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like when my parents had me, my mom was 28, my dad was 30. When I was 28 and 30, I had no idea what the hell I was doing about anything. And like they of course aren't any different, but you don't realize that until you're that age and you're like, I could not be responsible for an entire child at 28. No.
Yeah. And I think I heard recently, you know, obviously we know in theory, like not every person is going to like you. And this person took it a little farther in saying that like not everybody is going to like you because if everybody in your life liked you, then that means that you're not your own person and you're kind of molding yourself and becoming who all these people in your life want you to be.
Oh, I love that.
And I think what you're saying about conflict and kind of digging and finding yourself is really valuable because if we think, you know, oh, well, I'm a people pleaser, I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna go into this relationship and be the person that they want me to be, and eventually they'll like me for who I am. But like then you lose yourself in those relationships, and you know, if somebody's not gonna like you for who you actually are, do you really want to be in that relationship?
Exactly.
And so I think really just digging deep and being like, no, I'm gonna be my own self. I'm going to communicate my needs and my wants. And like, if this person is not interested, this person's not interested. Yeah. And that's okay. At least I'm still myself. At least I'm still like holding my boundaries and being true to myself. Yeah.
I mean, the most important relationship that you have is the one you have with yourself. And like you have to like yourself. You have to love yourself. And that is really, really hard work.
Super complex. And I think that a lot of the things that we talk about or that I'm sort of hearing is like a lot easier to say than to implement. You know, I think like we do have to unpack all of those things. I'm thinking of someone like I met with recently who doesn't have like positive self-image, doesn't love themselves. You know, I could say, well, like, you know, all of the things that I just said, but like we still have to unpack all of that stuff before we actually get to the implementation process, right? You know, it's like, it's so much more complex. So like the fact that you've had like some great therapy is, again, like, you know, I say this all the time as a therapist, like, so important.
Yeah. When it's also like, it's not linear. Like I was doing really well and I had a really great date earlier in the week. And at the end, I started to get these, like, I was like, yeah, like everything here is like a secure attachment. And at the end, I was like, oh gosh, we don't have a plan to see each other again. And there's like some bigger kind of factors that are happening that are unmovable, like geography. And I started to get anxious attachment and like totally fell into old patterns. And luckily this person is really, really great. And they were like, hey, did I do something wrong? I was like, no, why? I was like, no, why? And he was like, well, you know, you seemed really distant or sad at the end. And I was like, oh, sad. Let me explain to you exactly what's happening. Like, thank you for knowing me and recognizing this, because I didn't realize why I had fallen into that pattern, but here it is. So yeah. Not linear. Not fun, not linear. I was like, I've done so much growth. I was like, oh man, there's more.
I was really preaching to my younger self about the don't mold yourself and be a people pleaser.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, how do you define and experience intimacy outside of the traditional notions of, say, like romantic or sexual relationships?
I think my most intimate relationships are the ones I have with my friends, and like friends and like my family. Like my sister is my absolute best friend. She's somebody who understands me. I mean, partly because we've like grown up fairly similarly, and also my brothers were like my siblings and I are incredibly close. But like my two best friends are two people who, one of them lives in New York now, one of them lives in Atlanta. And I would do anything for them, like absolutely anything. Another one's like in LA and in Vermont. And we can be honest and open and be radically vulnerable with each other. And to me, that is intimacy. And I've been reading a lot of things lately that your friend should be your more intimate relationships. It doesn't have to be your spouse or your sexual partners. It's great if they are. But to me, my friends are everything. They're the people who have seen me through 6 really difficult years. My dad died. My marriage ended. I was finishing my PhD. And they've been there for me in ways that I can't explain, and I can tell them anything. I can share with them the complex things that I'm thinking about. Like, I cry in front of them all of the time. So for me, it's little things like that. And then other ways to experience intimacy is like, you know, having friends that you can cuddle with and that can hold you and things like that. And for me, I mean, like, yes, sex obviously is like very intimate, but somebody like holding my hand or people like touching my hair, like stroking my hair, like caressing my scalp. To me, that is the single most intimate and comforting thing that a person can do. And there's only like 3 people in the world that can do that I will allow to do that. I mean, aside from somebody who washes my hair and like when you're getting a cut. And then I'm always like, I just need you to know I really love it when people like massage my scalp. I'm like, okay, that's cool. So that's like a rotating cast of characters. But it's, you know, it's just like a really small, like 3 people that can do that. And so like to me, that's really intimate.
Yeah. I think that's helpful to know about yourself.
Yeah. And like, who can touch you where, how they can touch you, what you find comforting. I'm somebody who finds physical touch exceptionally comforting. And I don't know why people touching my hair is the most comforting of all, but I really like it. And so like when I'm anxious, if I'm around my sister, I'll be like, hey, can I just touch your hair and like smell your head for a second? Because my sister has a very distinctive body scent and I love it more than anything. And it's just like, it's instantly comforting.
That's so nice.
So it's not just people touching your head. You like touching other people's heads.
Yeah. So there's something about like, it's mostly my sister. But like when I was a kid, when I would be anxious and I would like go and sleep in bed with my mom, she would like roll over so like I could braid her hair and things like that. So I don't know. I find people caring for your hair really intimate. Yeah. So that's why it's like, it's 3 people. It's my mom, my sister, and like this one other person that can touch my hair, and that's it. Nobody else.
Yeah.
What were some of the dominant messages you grew up with about sex and relationships, and how have those shaped your perspective over time?
So there was really no communication about sex besides don't do it, like until you're married, and that men are always out to just like have sex with you, which is something that I'm unlearning, which is like not actually true. Like most men aren't just only thinking about sex. So that had like when my younger self would be like, wait, what? You don't always want to have sex? That's weird. Like society has told me that is what toxic masculinity wants. So that's weird. And then thinking about relationships, like some of the messages that I grew up with when I was little, again, kind of coming. My mom isn't a monster. She really is like a nice person. But one of the things that she would say to like me and my sister when we'd have relationships, she'd be like, well, don't mess this up. This is your last best hope. And I was like, I'm 19. Like, I really hope that this is like not my peak. So very much like what Hannah Gadsby says about Picasso and her stand-up Nanette. She's like, a woman is just never, ever, ever in her prime at 17. And this idea, my mom would also be like, well, if I had one job and it was to find my daughter's husbands, I've done an excellent job. And now that I'm divorced, I'm like, I don't know, Mom, did you? So like things like that, where it's just like this idea of a relationship being central. And I think that's like a holdover from the way she was raised, which is a holdover from the way her parents were raised. So it's always this idea of, like you shouldn't be alone, kind of standing on your own. And it's one of those things now that I'm the only person in my family. I mean, my dad's parents got divorced, but I'm the only person in my family who is now divorced. And so thinking about what that means and like the shame and stigma that I was allowing to creep in. And I was like, no, like you had a 20-year relationship. That is a success. Yeah, like that is successful. And I know he's been canceled, but Louis C.K. had a really, really great point. And also, like, he's just a gross person, so it makes me uncomfortable to have to say this. But he had this, even a broken clock can be right twice a day, right? But he said, like, no healthy relationship comes to an end. And that's really true. Like, by the end, like, it wasn't the relationship for me. And so, like, unpacking that and learning that was, especially in this background of, like, this is your last best hope. And I was like, well, now I'm 42. Like, who's going to want somebody who's 42 and divorced? So, like, unpacking a lot of that is something that I'm doing now in therapy. And this idea of, like, it's really, you're not that old. Like, you can, like, you're not going to die alone, So, yeah, those are the messages I got, was, like, be in a relationship and allow a person to take care of you. I was like, that doesn't jive.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What do you want a PhD for? I was like, because I'm curious and I want a PhD.
Exactly. Yeah. If you could give yourself at a younger age advice, what kind of advice would you give your younger you?
I think the biggest thing that I would tell younger me, and any young person who asked me this question on like a career panel, is like, it doesn't matter. It really, like, the things that you are worried about at the end of the day, there are multiple paths forward. There is no way of knowing what is going to happen. Just breathe. Like, it's not as big of a deal as you are making it out to be. And then I think the other one is to just fully inhabit who you are. Like, if you are that weird person, those weird things that make you you, embrace them. Shout them out. It just be that person, because you spend so long. And eventually I think most people will get to be the person that they truly are and to be comfortable with that. But if I could have done that at 14, 15, 16, I just think, like, where I could have been today, I mean, there wouldn't have been as many learning and growing opportunities, but just being brave and being true to yourself, I think, is the most important thing. Like, it doesn't matter what people are thinking about you. People are probably not thinking about you. They're probably thinking about, how are other people thinking about me? How do they think that I'm a weirdo? Like, everyone's thinking that everyone is thinking that they're a weirdo, and we're all weirdos. Just embrace your weirdo-ness. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit before about talking to some friends and getting some misinformation about sex and sexual health and all of that.
So many.
And you didn't have those conversations with your parents. So where else did you turn to find information and to educate yourself on these topics?
I was really lucky, and the school system in New Jersey in the early 90s provided pretty decent sex education. I mean, there was like a cringy video where where a group of girls came over for a slumber party, and one of them gets her period, and then the dad makes fallopian tube-shaped pancakes. So it was like cringy, but it was all medically...
Talent, if that's a...
I mean, and then she, like, the wife sends the husband out for pads, and he's like, I'm going to go get some pads. And I was like, oh, wow, look at what this could be. I mean, it was weird and cringy, and I'm sure you can find it on the internet. And I oftentimes am like, did I hallucinate that? But I did not. So I was just really fortunate that I was in a school system that did provide comprehensive sex ed, because, again, the early 90s, Al Gore hadn't invented the internet yet. And we had a set of encyclopedias. So I was always that person who was like furiously reading a book. So I was like going to the S part of the dictionary, not the dictionary, of the encyclopedia, and like reading up on sex. And then it'd be like see also, and then go to the references and find those. So I was educating myself in the nerdiest possible way, which totally tracks for who I am as a human.
I was like, that wasn't your first clue that you were going to get a PhD?
Yeah, no, not at all. And then being somebody who would like read books like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which everyone should go see the film. It was like a really nice, reminder of like what times were like. And then I like remember reading that book and it being so foundational, and like finding those books where there were mentions of sex and sexuality and menstruation and things like that, and relationships, and being like an awkward teen. So it's just always somebody who was like reading for information. Yeah.
I'm so curious what your comprehensive sex ed was like, and if New Jersey still has that, because I feel like we had another person from New Jersey that was not necessarily pleased with the way things were, and we have not heard from a lot of people about good sex ed. So.
I actually do need to shout out New Jersey for a moment. They're the most menstrually equitable state in the United States. They have more menstrual equity laws than any other state. They allow students and workers to work remotely if they are experiencing menstrual symptoms or they are menstruating. They don't need to prove anything. They have a lot of free menstrual product programs and things like that, and have special funds set aside. So I think it's something like 47 different menstrual equity laws on the books, so far and above the next state, which I think only has like 20-ish. So, and again, this also is like through the memory of somebody who is 42, and I got that information at like 12. So we're talking about 30 years of forgetfulness. And I'm sure it wasn't like comprehensive the way we think of comprehensive today. But yeah, anyway, so it's easy to trash New Jersey, but also you don't have to pump your own gas, and the most menstrually equitable state in the U.S. So maybe not a terrible place. Maybe we should not shit on Jersey.
maybe we don't shit on them all of the time.
Maybe not as much. They deserve a little bit of love.
Oh, that's funny. So how has your understanding of pleasure evolved over time?
So it's grown. It's not just about sexual pleasure. It's about finding pleasure in like everyday experiences. There's somebody who once described my life as picturesque. And it was like, when you go grocery shopping, it's like picturesque. And I was like, well, yeah. It was like, if everyone has to buy groceries, I can choose to have a pleasurable experience and like create or curate things around that. So like, I'll go when I can to like the fresh vegetable market or something like that. Again, there is a certain amount of like economic privilege that happens with that. I was like, or if I'm going to go, I have a day off, I'm going to like, these are the experiences I want to have. Here's where I want to go. If I need new glasses, like I'm going to just be fully in that moment. So I think pleasure then comes down to like experiencing it every day and like and creating those moments that are quote unquote picturesque, and just being like, well, if this is something I have to do, let's shift it from something I have to do to something that I get to do to care for myself and make it enjoyable. Because otherwise there's a whole lot of drudgery. Do I like to cook for myself? No. Do I like to grocery shop? Absolutely not. Do I like to take the subway? No. But if I can listen to music or I can read a book while I'm on the train, that is a more enjoyable, more pleasurable experience. So just thinking about those little ways that I can do like little bits of self-care when I can.
Yeah. Just expanding the definition, I think, is so helpful, because sometimes we get really focused on sex and not pleasure.
Yeah.
You know, and so pleasure can be so many different things.
Yeah. And if we're talking about pleasure in a sexual way, also realizing that orgasm does not have to be present. It doesn't have to be the end goal, shouldn't be the end goal. It's like, are you enjoying the experience in the moment? I've had plenty of pleasurable sexual experiences that didn't have or involve orgasm at all. But it's about being close to somebody and communicating and just being in that moment with them.
Yeah. We talk all the time. Expanding your sexual menu.
Your language.
Doesn't have to involve orgasm. Doesn't have to involve penetration.
No, not at all.
But I think also to say that, like, we weren't just talking, when we asked that question, we're not just talking about sex.
Yeah.
Right? Because we want pleasure to be like, ooh, sex can be pleasurable. But also, like, I love my morning routine where I get to have a cup of tea and read a book and just, like, leisurely, like, sit in my, dining room and look out on the squirrels, right? Like that's pleasure to me.
Yeah.
And it's equal to, it's different than the pleasure of me getting to masturbate or to have, partnered sex.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a book called Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown. Just put in a plug for that. It would just just thinking about how you can bring pleasure into your everyday life was critically like a perspective shift moment for me.
Yeah. We have promoted her often. I have a great quote from her about making your yes, really authentic is about being able to say no.
Learning that no is a complete sentence was also like a fundamental shift for me. I was like, no. Yeah. And you don't have to explain anything. You're just like, no.
Yeah. People have to control their emotions and figure out and depersonalize themselves. It's not your job. Yeah.
So you talked about the end of your marriage and no longer being a healthy relationship, according to Louis C.K.
I know, problematic. I'm sorry, but it was a really helpful quote.
That's all right. I'm curious what a healthy relationship looks like to you and how that has changed over time or how you define healthy relationships.
I think it's two people communicating, just really, truly communicating and not being afraid to share what they actually really want and not really worrying about like that stigma or discrimination. So being able to be like vulnerable with that other person and truly who you are, I think is key. And I love the idea of two people choosing to be with each other every single day, right? Because relationships are a lot of work. It's just also something people are like, oh, when you're together, it feels easy. That's a quote from Fleabag. The episode where her parents are getting married or her father is getting remarried. It's like, they say that it's easy, but it's not. It's like, I don't think love is easy. And that is right. Like, it is not easy to be with another person because you are making small compromises, and that I think is the beauty of it, and the choosing every day. And I think also in the choosing to be with somebody, it opens up then other types of relationship styles, like people who are ethically non-monogamous, or they're in an open relationship, or they're polyamorous, where you still have that primary partner or that nesting partner, or if you're in a poly situation, you have a plurality of partners, but you're choosing actively to be with that person every day. And I think that is what I am searching for, somebody who chooses me every single day. And the rest of it then is a constellation of things that we agree upon.
So how do you navigate the intersectionality of identities that you hold sort of within the context of sex and relationships? And are there some like unique challenges or joys that you've discovered in that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a cisgender, queer woman who is white, who's like very middle class. So I don't have a lot of challenging identities, I don't think, to hold. But I am a person of size. I mean, maybe not as much now as I used to be. I used to be much fatter. I'm going to reclaim that word. Not in a bad way. Just my body is just different now for a variety of reasons. So that was always something that's interesting to me, as being a larger size person or a person of size and trying to navigate sexual relationships. Because there is this sort of perverse thing that happens where, like, when you're catcalled on the street, you're like, ooh, no. But then part of you is also like, oh, well, my body must be acceptable and desirable today. So sitting with that dichotomy and untangling that was really important. And then, like, being on the dating apps as a larger person or a person of size, like, you get a lot of really disgusting messages that don't treat you like a human and were, like, in fact, a lot of times very violent. And then people being like, oh, do you know why I was attracted to you? And I was like, I don't know, like, because I'm interesting, like, I'm a funny person. My bio is really great. My pictures show that I'm, like, charming. I don't know, like, any number of things. They're like, no, it's your size. I just can't help but be attracted to people like you. And I was like, you can't help but be attracted to somebody like me? Like, I am pretty. Yeah. We're pretty enough. Like, leave me alone. But just think, like, it's just, like, designed to make you feel less than. So, like, I always think about that with people who are disabled, or people who are people of size, or there's some other, like, physical kind of manifestation. Because when you're on, like, apps and things like that, you can't truly know a person based on, like, I don't know, 150 words or something like that.
Right.
So I was thinking about that. Like, so it was like a moment where I was just like, it is difficult to exist in this body. And then I was like, other people who have physical disabilities or visible disabilities must get this too all of the time. So that was definitely like something that was challenging. And then as my body has shifted, then people start being like, oh my gosh, your profile is so interesting. Like, I had to shoot my shot that you would even respond to me. And I was like, it is the exact same profile, the exact same words as when I was in a different sized body. But now you're coming at me like I'm actually a human. So that's been like a weird thing to untangle. And then just realizing too, like, when you're a person of a certain size, there are just different ways that your body moves, or different sounds that might happen during sex. And they're not bad. They're just different.
Right.
And just trying to untie that body shame, because there is so much fat phobia out there that exists. But then really getting to like know myself and to love myself and kind of come to sort of terms, not terms, that sounds so bad, like just like beginning to be comfortable with myself has been such a beautiful experience, and reconnecting to my body and listening to it and not being in conflict with my body and actually like being like, okay, like we're in a partnership together and you can tell me things and give me signals and I'm going to listen to those. And then I'm going to care for you and actually nurture you. And I credit my doula training with that shift in perspective, because before it was always Marybec versus her body. And now it's Marybec and her body work together.
One of our other guests said this really great thing that I've been using, that you can't talk bad about your body while your body's in the room.
Ooh.
I know. I was like, I'm using that. She's like, please.
I had an NYU student that told me, he was like, you have to thank your body for giving you what you needed it, because you've asked it to do the thing that it is doing. And when you ask it to do something new, you need to give it time to catch up. It's very true. Like my body size is very much tied to a sexual assault that I had when I was a child, where I didn't know that it was about power. I thought it was about attraction. And I was like, okay, well, I need to make myself quote unquote unattractive. And to an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old. I mean, I wasn't that young, but like people as young as that on up to like 13, 14, 15 are like, oh, well, fat bodies aren't attractive because that's what we were told every single day. I was like, well, if I do that, then this experience won't happen again. And realizing that connection again through therapy, that's where some of my eating habits and the size stuff came in. It was like, oh, you were just a young person who was scared, who was trying to take care of yourself. And the only way that she knew how to protect herself from this situation happening again. So it's one of those really profound things. I think Roxane Gay also writes about that. I think maybe in Bad Feminist. I'm not sure. But I know Roxane Gay writes very much about the connection between body size and sexual assault. Yeah.
And I think others have definitely talked about that. And I just want to say thank you for sharing, because I think it is really important to name that. And you know, I know it can be very vulnerable to share, but so I really appreciate you bringing that into the conversation. But also to say that, like, I'm hearing a lot around needing to be in control, right?
So much hypervigilance.
So many people who've experienced, like, sexual assault, like, find ways, whether it's around their body or in other ways in which, like, oh, if I don't do this, then this won't happen again. Exactly. Like, that's something I hear so often. I mean, almost, I want to say 100% of the time. In my work with people who experience sexual assault. And so I think, like, just to normalize that, like, you were doing what you needed in the moment.
And it's a form of self-love. Like, whatever that protective thing is, it is you realizing that you're a human that needs to protect yourself and that you love yourself enough to protect yourself from it happening again. And, like, realizing that, like, it wasn't me hating my body and hating myself and that's why I was doing it. It was me loving myself, and that was the only way that I knew how to love myself in that moment, because I was young and I didn't, there's no way I could have known. And, like, in the 80s, 90s, having those conversations were very different than they are today.
Yeah. It's such a self-compassionate perspective, too, to be like, that's what I knew, I was loving myself, instead of saying, oh, I was hating. No, like, you were actually loving yourself. And so that self-compassion, I think we beat ourselves up all the time in our head.
I mean, that's, again, like another therapy nugget that I've discovered. It was, like, also, like, the same thing with, like, getting divorced. My therapist being like, Marybec, a lot of people will stay and develop habits to kind of insulate against that. But, you know, ending a relationship and being like, I deserve better. I love myself, and I love myself enough to risk the uncertainty of perhaps never having a partner or a long-term partner again. That shows that you love yourself. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do love myself.
And I really resonated with your comment about the disconnect between you and your body. And I didn't realize that was something that I've had to consciously think about now in a pregnant body. And, like, talking with my therapist about, like, all these fears that I have about pregnancy and delivery, and, like, I don't trust my body, and kind of trying to dig to the deep of, like, why don't I trust my body? And I think it's because people and female presenting folks often have a disconnect of our bodies and ourselves, because we don't necessarily want to think about people catcalling us or whatever. It's sort of like, it's easier to be like, oh, well, that's my body, that's not me. And to kind of make that separation. And so I think that I have lived in this separation, and I just have never really acknowledged it. And now that I am asking my body to do this thing, to grow a human, and to, like, also then, like, help me deliver this human, and, like, that's a lot to ask of my body. And I'm like, I don't know if I trust this body.
Right.
I don't know. My body's not really failed me too many times, but, like, but this is a lot to ask.
Right.
So I don't know if it's up for it, and like trying to reconcile. And I think just the positive affirmations, I think your doula work, I think that's spot on, because I'm reading books now of like how to like reintegrate and to like trust my body and to trust that all of the people that have given birth years and years before me, like they have all done this, and like it's like this way to like reconnect to my body. And I think that it's just something I've never thought about, but think that a lot of female presenting people have that disconnect.
It's almost like a disassociation, right?
Yeah.
Like in order to cope.
Yeah. No, and bodies are again incredible. Like that your body will delay ovulation until it's the right moment. That cervical fluid has sugar in it to feed the sperm, and like has little like tubal kind of pathways so that dysmorphic sperm can't fit through to get there. Like cervical fluid, I don't call it cervical mucus because it's not actually a mucus, it's a fluid. Is just like, it is incredible. And asking, like, your body is growing another human. That is incredible. But it's also very visible. And I'm sure people come up and, like, want to touch your belly all the time. You're like, please don't. But, like, and you've never done it before. So getting your body to trust that is huge. And then afterwards, like, if you're going to do body feeding, breastfeeding, test feeding, body feeding, that's also, like, another thing that you've never asked your body to do. And so much around the media is focused around, like, are you a good mom? Did you, like, what was your birth like? Was it natural, or did you have help? Was it a C-section? Oh, did you really give birth? Like, there's so much judgment around, especially birthing parents. And then I think a lot about, like, in my doula practice, the thing I focus a lot on abortion doula work, and then postpartum, because I think the reintegration of a new little life, new little human into a couple, and helping them, like, think about their sexuality and their sexual relationship afterwards is what I'm interested in. And then, like, the mental health of the birthing parent, like, because we don't really talk about postpartum depression that often, and it's so much swept under the rug. And, like, oh, well, you know, if you were a good mom, you wouldn't be depressed about having a baby. And you're like, well, it's really not that. It's my brain chemistry. Yeah. I call it the mommy industrial complex, and that's why she used to be on the Regis Philbin show. Kelly, I forget her last name. Kelly Ripa. Oh, I think she's the worst because she has all this, like, I am on the Good Morning America. I'm on a TV show, another TV show. My husband is also a soap actor. And look at me doing my TD Bank commercials and my Electrolux commercials. And one of the Electrolux commercials, like, I even had time to make a birthday cake for my dog. And I was like, shut up. It's because you have help. And that's fine that you have help. But, like, you are not super mom. You're not doing it by yourself. There's a team of people helping you. Yeah. And you're out there peddling the image that a mom can have, like, 4 jobs and a great partner and a healthy and active sex life and make a birthday cake for a dog. And some days it's all anyone can do. I have none of those things. I am a single person, and I'm like, some days I'm like, I can't get out of bed in time to go to work on time. I'm just going to roll out and do a Zoom.
Yeah. I don't know how I'm going to wake up early in the morning.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Yeah. I haven't washed my hair in 4 days. I'm going to pull it back in a ponytail and, like, call it a messy bun.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you seen that they have a new medication out for postpartum? I was just, like, really interested in that, and since it came up, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I've seen it. I haven't done a lot of research into it, but, like, I think it's and just to put in a plug for doulas, I used to have a very, like, different idea of, like, this woohoo-ness, but they're just there to help be an advocate for the person, the birthing parent, or whatever. Like, there are people who are death doulas that help people experience those, like, final moments in life, or people who are seeking an abortion, things like that. Just help them kind of think through decisions and help them advocate for themselves in that room where they might feel pressured by somebody in a white coat to do something that they don't want to do. So it's about slowing everything down and allowing the person who is having that health service and that experience, like, really choose what they want.
Yeah. And it's good to have a professional and experienced person in the room that knows the options.
Absolutely,
right?
Like,
and I was like, oh, this is not normal.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask the provider if you could do something different?
Yeah, like, and I'm absolutely not a clinician. I maybe could deliver a baby if I absolutely had to, but I have no desire to do that because I'm not trained for that.
Blood.
Yeah. I think maybe I'm okay with the blood now, possibly. Who knows?
Yeah.
So how often do you talk about sex in general? With whom do you have those conversations, and how important is it in your life and relationships?
I talk about sex literally every single day. Every single day, multiple times a day. It is what my life's work is. It is the thing that makes me happy to talk about. I want to change the conversations around sex that we are having with our peers, our partners, our parents, our providers.
Those are a lot of peace.
I know. That is the little slogan I've been working on for many, many years. So thinking about those things, and I will have the conversation with anyone who wants to have it, and even people who aren't comfortable around having it. I have a very dear friend who is somebody who has chosen not to have sex until they are married. And we will then speak about sex in a very different way, but it's still coming up, and they feel comfortable then to ask questions. And I can be like, well, in my experience, this. So even in that not having a conversation or having conversations around people's boundaries around talking about conversations around sex, it is a form of talking about it and kind of getting them to realize that this is something that we can talk about in ways that make you feel comfortable. Because if you are having sexual conversations or conversations about sex with people who don't want to, you are violating consent. Mm-hmm. So always making sure that the conversations that you're entering into are ones that people want to have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Even if you're dating and you want to have it as a conversation about something that's important to you, right? Like it should be like, hey, at some point, I'd really like to have a conversation about conflict and maybe about our, I don't know, things that we have in common, but I also want to talk about sex because it is something I want in my relationships. Yeah. We don't have to talk about it right now, but I want to say that it's something that I'm going to need to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So getting that consent, even in like those ways that we don't often think about it.
Yeah. And I'm somebody who likes to talk about like big, deep things. Like I think about sex, death, and time literally every single day. So if you're not into those big things, I'm a Scorpio sun, moon, Pisces rising. So if you're not here for the heavy topics, then I don't know. There's not much to go on.
Yeah. And I don't know if this person you were talking about has made that decision to not have sex because of cultural or religious beliefs.
Cultural and religious reasons.
And you mentioned loosely having a Christian upbringing, but I'm curious if you had any cultural or religious beliefs that you held on to or that kind of influenced some of the ways that you have come to understand sex and relationships.
Yeah. I've talked a lot about like the kind of cultural, like socio-cultural things around my mom just like not wanting to talk about sex. But my parents, so my father has passed, so my dad was Catholic, but I still sometimes talk about him in the present. So my dad was Catholic and my mom is a Christian Scientist. So not a Scientologist, but a Christian Scientist. And sort of briefly for anyone who doesn't know, it's a religious group that believes that prayer is the way to heal yourself, and you can supplement it with medicine, which is very opposite, I think, to most other kind of Christian or maybe largely other religious beliefs, where it's medicine that is supplemented then by religious belief. So Christian Scientist kind of flips it on the other side, and there's no ban against getting vaccinated or using medicine or anything like that, but it's also this idea that like you should have a strong faith so that you can kind of pray around getting healthy. So the thing I think I took away from both Catholicism and Christian Science being, because my siblings and I all went to like Christian Science Sunday school and things like that. But obviously very much in what I do today, not following that. One of my brothers is an anesthesiologist. The other one has a degree in biology. And my sister does like fair housing stuff. So all of us sort of like falling away from that. But it's the mysticism of it and like kind of like the woohoo-ness of it and the idea that it is directed from you and that you should be the one that is asking for these things and thinking about what you want. So in a lot of ways, it's about self-actualization, or this is what I've taken away from it and how it sort of now fits into my worldview. It's like self-actualization, bodily autonomy, and being like, this is the experience that I want to have, and how can I take away from that? Which I'm sure the Christian Science Church, the Mother Church in Boston, would absolutely not agree with and be like, what is happening here? But it's this kind of like belief in the occult, which then, if you know anything about me now, it's all like astrology and tarot cards. So like it sort of fits in this like metaphysical thing. And there is sort of that also kind of metaphysical belief or occultish belief in Catholicism, where like the transubstantiation of the body and the blood of Christ, the wine and the wafers and things like that. So I think it's that I picked and chose the things that made sense to me, or like the parts I was like, well, that's weird. And I like that I can sort of be in control of this. And it's me working in partnership with a deity instead of a hierarchical relationship where the deity is like, this is going to happen. You need to ask me for forgiveness. And I was like, nah, what if we just work on this together? So I it's like sort of in a weird way, I like flipped around some interesting childhood experiences.
Yeah.
So in what ways do you prioritize self-care in your sexual and intimate relationships, and how does that impact your overall well-being?
Yeah, so I'm somebody who sex is really important for me, and just like physical intimacy sort of in general and physical touch. So for me, self-care looks like a lot of solo sex, so masturbation, things like that, making sure that I'm checking in with myself and just having these like experiences of intimacy with myself, learning about my body, learning about what I like. So that way when I'm having partnered sex, I know what that looks like. I know where I like to be touched. I know how I like to be touched, the intensity of touch. Things like that. And then allowing myself to experience things that are more broad, like sometimes into like kink and BDSM stuff. I think a lot of times, especially as like femme-bodied people or people with vulvas, we hear like, oh, you know, if you're a feminist, you wouldn't like to be spanked or tied up or like, you know, be involved in like a lot of kink type stuff or like, you know, degradation. And I was like, that's not really true. Like you can be a feminist and still also want those things. It's about finding a partner that you can talk about the boundaries around, like power play and stuff like that. So always thinking about like exploring what it is I like on my own, so that way I can articulate that in a very real way to a partner. So I think that's like one of the ways that I practice self-care. I try to like nourish my body and moisturize my body and spend time like inhabiting it and being in the present moment. That is something I have never really liked to do. We talked a little bit about disassociation before, which is definitely a lot of what I spent my childhood doing, but trying to be more mindful and more present in the moment and not thinking about the future. So if I can reduce future anxiety, I'm like almost like let future Marybec worry about future things. Current Marybec needs to worry about current things. Like save some future anxiety.
I like that.
Yeah, that's
So we've come to our last question.
Ooh.
What does good sex mean to you?
I think it's really about communication and just kind of knowing what it is that you want and not being afraid to explore. And if you can, finding somebody who you feel comfortable talking to and exploring and just being able to advocate for yourself and realizing that there is a realm of things that are normal desires for you to have. Normal is a spectrum. It is not a single point. And you anywhere along that spectrum, as long as there can be consent and consent is given, it is an okay thing for you to want sexually, and that is good sex. If you are enjoying yourself, forget about what anyone else would say. Forget about what society would say. If you are happy with what you were doing in the moment, that is good sex.
Yeah. So this is a fun conversation. It's always like hard to end a conversation that you just want to keep going.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's anything else that you want to share with our listeners about this topic or others about your work. Just wanted to see if we missed anything or if you want to turn any of those questions around on us.
Ooh. Now my brain is overloaded.
Oh, no.
I know. I mean, I think I sort of hit on the most important thing for me is that like normal is a spectrum, and there's any number of things that you can want, not just sexually, but just like in your life. And don't let anyone tell you that normal is a single point. Normal isn't. And also embrace weird. That's where life gets interesting, when you challenge yourself and you sort of think about what it is that you actually want and you're true to yourself.
Yeah. And where can people find you? Either both on campus, off campus, classes you're teaching?
I don't have an office because I'm an adjunct at NYU, but I'm sort of generally around. My NYU email is mgt244@nyu.edu. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, although I don't really TikTok. I'm at Marybec Griffin. It's a pretty unique name. So if you Google Marybec, you're going to find me or my mom. But it's pretty easy to distinguish between the two of us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you have questions about the podcast or anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. This email address is monitored during business hours and may take 3 to 4 days for follow-up. We are definitely open to critical and thoughtful feedback, as we didn't cover everything in this episode and might have said something that was inaccurate or that had a negative impact on someone. If you have questions about your sexual health and are an NYU student, you can connect with our Student Health Center sex expert at sexpert@nyu.edu or schedule an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. Look at our show notes for additional information and resources, including organizations, articles, books, and videos.
If you have urgent mental health concerns, safety issues, or you are worried that someone might have caused harm to you, or that you might have caused harm to someone, then you can contact NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. Chat with them using their mobile app or email them at wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For anyone, NYU or non-NYU listeners, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or the National Mental Health Hotline. Simply dial 988 from anywhere in the U.S.
Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we continue to talk about good sex at NYU. Subscribe to the podcast to hear all of our quickies and interviews with NYU community members. Thanks to our content contributors for this episode, Bernadette Kerr, Alyssa LaFosse, Dr. Dominic Baini-Amisa, Zoe Raguzios, and to our health promotion team, Anna Genova, Jenny Mellum, Parade Stone, and Arna Dixit, and to Gotham Studios and Karen Ortman.